Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Jeff. Today, I got a little bit of a funny video that I want to make, and today I want to talk about the story of how I essentially lowballed myself, probably about $20,000 to $40,000 on my first industry job. I figured this would be a funny one to talk about, and also a great lesson because right now I know a lot of folks are out in the market, ramping up job search, that kind of thing, and I definitely don't want anybody out there to be able to make the same mistake that I did. And I think I got a lot out of it. And especially now that I'm late into my career and it's been a long time since this event, I learned a ton, and I figured that this would be a good story to be able to share and talk about. Okay, so to start this off, right? To start the story off, this was my very first software engineering job. If you watch some of my other videos, you know that I did a boot camp. And then before that, I worked construction. And so for myself, it was an incredible hard job search. I didn't have like multiple job offers on the line. I simply just had one. And my hit ratio of getting a job interview, that kind of thing, was really, really rare. And so I ended up getting this interview and ultimately being the first job that I ended up getting. And of course, this video is not about like the actual things I learned and the job itself. This is solely based on the salary negotiation aspect of the job. So I get this interview. First of all, this is a really important part of the story, but this was actually a senior software engineering job. It could be luck, it could be skill. I made a couple other videos about how I was able to get a senior software engineering interview in the first place, but keep that in mind because just like any other software engineering job, like any job period, you talk to the recruiter, you go through your rounds of like your phone screen, you do the on-site, and then you do your negotiation. And so that's essentially what happened to me is like I ended up getting the hit for this position, and I had that first initial phone screen with the recruiter. Like pretty much every other job out there, recruiters will always ask you, hey, what's your salary expectation? And out of inexperience, this is where my big pitfall and where this 1 2 minute conversation ended up coming back to haunt me in the future. Keep in mind, right? I'm mentioning this again. I did the boot camp, and in the boot camp, the average salary expectation was 100K, like $103,000, Bay Area, San Francisco pay. And so that's where I was aiming for. For myself, I came from construction. These numbers are 2 times, 3 times what I've ever dreamed of. And for me at that time, that sort of salary was completely life changing. And so having that in mind, and also just having not a lot of high hopes for landing this job because it was a senior level role, and I wasn't confident in my coding abilities and not completely sure where I stood at the time. Didn't have high hopes. And so the best I did was I just tried not to lowball myself. And I just thought about what would be a unimaginable number for myself that would be totally life changing. And I came up with the number of 135,000. And this was where the mistake happens. In that call, when they asked that, I thought about it a little bit, and that's exactly what I said. I said, hey, I'd be happy with 135,000. I didn't talk about any bonuses. I didn't talk about any sign-ons or like stock options or perks or vacation, nothing. I just said 135,000, and the recruiter, next thing you know, just says, okay. I actually didn't think about this very much afterwards. Like most software interviews, it's a long process. So probably about a month goes by after I did all the different rounds and talked to all the different folks on the team. And some magical way, I actually ended up getting a job offer. And that's when the recruiter essentially made a contact back to me outside of just scheduling, that kind of thing. Right. And so I had a brief chat with them. We didn't talk about salary actually in that instance. And next thing I know, a couple days go by, I get a job offer in my email box, and you guessed it, that exact number shows up in my job offer. I was extremely excited. This was like, again, this was life-changing, a life-changing moment for myself, and essentially changed the entire trajectory of where my life was headed at that time. But because they came back with that exact number, no bonuses, no sign on, nothing, like just that number itself, I knew I must have left money on the table. And that's when I called the recruiter and said, hey, is there any room for negotiation, that kind of stuff. And of course, the answer they gave me was, hey, this is what you asked for, and we were able to fight and get you that number, right? And so it's gonna be really hard to be able to, talk your way out of that, essentially. And for myself, I didn't have any leverage. It's not like I had any other job offers. And I think that my demeanor and how I was acting at the time, because it was way out of the boundaries of what was possible, there's like no way I could hide my excitement essentially. So the only reason I was able to find out that I was getting paid underpaid so much was because, throughout the years, I made great friends with my coworkers, people in my org, and right, conversations about promotions and raises, that stuff arises. And that's when I spoke with my coworkers and being a little bit transparent, on our personal time. We mentioned those things, and they even kind of made fun of me for how badly I undersold myself and lowballed myself in that range. And so that's when it basically I found out, and that's essentially the story there of how I realized that I was getting lowballed so hard at my first job. Man, interesting experience here, and I definitely got a lot of takeaway from this, right? And so if you first and foremost, if you do the math in 3 years I was there, almost 3 years I was there, you can see how much money I left on the table. But I don't think it was all bad, and so that's kind of what I want to talk about here is like I want to talk about the goods that I got out of this. And then also, of course, I want to talk about how you could fix this. And of course, the negatives out of this. I want to just be able to touch on those 3 topics. Left a lot of money out of the table, but for myself, it just wasn't my goal at that point. And even walking away from that job, it wasn't a job that I was like, oh man, so painful. They were like ripping me off, that kind of thing. And I definitely think that the right thing that they should have done was, of course, being able to bring you closer to the range of the rest of the employees in that role. But, due to the culture of the company, that kind of thing, I wasn't. But my main goals, again, was just to be able to break in and learn tech and become a better programmer, which I did tenfolds in that job because it was such a high level while I was like so early on in my career. I would say that one of the things that I think was actually a sell for me that I can't confirm completely is that I might have been able to land that job or was one of the top candidates because I was such a bargain, right? Like I might have, in my personal opinion, I don't think I aced the interview in any way, but folks are always on a budget. Teams have budgets. And because I fit maybe below the means of the budget, I landed that job in the end. And if I would have there's a potential there. If I would have asked for a more competitive pay from the experience that I showed, I might not have landed that job. And so there is a little bit of a green pasture there, but I think that's kind of where it ends. I think in my opinion, right, like I did an incredibly poor job. And one thing that I hope that we all take away here is that and what I realize now being late in my career is in that instance, right, that you're making that recruiter call when they're asking you that salary pay. It's such a crucial conversation in a moment that makes it incredibly hard for you to walk back on your words once you lay down, what you need and the foundation of what you're looking for. You could do a poor thing like me and just be oblivious and inexperienced at that time and just throw them a number. But that's essentially it, right? It's like a lot of people don't realize that in that moment, it's no different than a salesperson at a car dealership trying to sell you a car. And on top of that, it's more complicated than that. There's even less transparency. It's almost a lot of these interviews and recruiter talks, it's like you're trying to buy a car and there's no price tag on it. And instead of them telling you the price up front, they're asking you what you're willing to pay for this car without even knowing how much the price of the car is. And so that's the number one trick that I always tell people. I always hear a lot of advice about like, let them give the number first and all the strategy behind that. But actually one of the tricks that I use is I always ask folks what the budget is for this position before I answer any sort of question for my end. One thing that I learned very quickly is like when they ask that question, there's no need for you to answer with a response right away. Even if you don't, I know it's an intimidating thing and it's a challenging thing. Even if you are one of those people that give folks the number, right? There's other approaches and you should be asking a lot more qualifying questions on top of that before you answer that question. And I think that's totally fair. And the dream scenario for a recruiter is you don't ask any questions and you just give them a number, right? And so always ask the question, ask what the budget is, and then make an assessment from there. I think that alone at least will put you at least in the range of that position, in my opinion. So I think the ultimate thing here though, and the thing that I want to conclude with here is that, yeah, I definitely think it was a challenging thing, but looking back, right, being such a long time ago and learning that lesson early on really set me up. Learning it the hard way really set me up and not being able to make that failure the next go around when I was like where I'm at now at a much higher level job and when there's more at stake and the salaries are much bigger. And looking back, right, it was a drop in the bucket for myself. And I ultimately, I'm actually glad that that happened early on rather than late in your career. And man, I can't urge how much that foundational call sets you, right? That number ends up being the number that you start talking about promotions on and salary increases. And that number just surely goes a long way. And once you get trapped in that, it's incredibly hard, especially once you start that job, to be able to, get some major bump or that kind of thing based off of like having an unequal pay versus some of your other coworkers or something of that nature. And it might be just be something you have to live with. But again, just to talk about this a little bit, and I definitely hope that this video was helpful. And if anything, just a little laugh to talk about another, career adventure that I had early in my career. And if you have any questions about this topic or any others, please let me know. I'll gladly talk about them. If not, I'll talk to you on the next one. Latest.